Well, my real purpose in this is to test my new lapel mic. Got one of these. Been trying all day. It charged for 4 hours. I don't know if it's working yet. Going to record a short video talking about Doc Savage. In fact, the brief story here is I thought I might make a video with this, try it out. That was this morning. It's now 3:30 in the afternoon. My mic charged for 4 hours. I just tried it. It didn't work. So I've made this is my fourth video today. I sat in my chair and was annoyed and looked to my left and I had all these Doc Savage. I have a bookcase and two full shelves of Doc Savage, either novels or books about Doc Savage. So thought I'd talk about those just to test this out. Um, I'm going to stop here, download this video, and see if my microphone's working. Then, whether it is or isn't, I'll come back and start over if it isn't, because that means there'd be no sound. And I'll make later, I will make a Doc Savage video. Alrighty, I think the audio is working. Wish there was some way I could tell for sure without stopping and listening, but we'll just keep going for 10 minutes maybe, and then I'll check. So I'm going to talk about Doc Savage, character that started in 1933, the original series, 1949, 16 years. Most of them monthly, sometimes twice a month. And at the end, not that. In 19 Sorry, I have health troubles. I mean, they're being tended to best they can, but they're chronic. In 1930, Street and Smith Publications had they were publishing magazines, but they also they sponsored a radio show to advertise their magazines. And the radio company invented a character which they owned because it was created specifically for them, called the Shadow. I was just the announcer. The Shadow would announce the stories, and the different radio people, including Orson Welles, would uh, would be the Shadow. Uh, People started going to newsstands, and this got back to Street and Smith, asking for that Shadow magazine. They thought there was a magazine with that character, although as of yet there was not. In 1931, Walter B. Gibson was invited to write a shadow novel. They needed, for the purposes of trademark at that time, they had to uh, put out an issue. Gibson wanted to create an actual character. And they let him, they paid him, and it sold out. So they asked him to do some more. And that became Gibson's job for the next uh, 14 years, writing The Shadow. Street and Smith, the relevant people were editor in chief Henry Ralston and the editor assigned to The Shadow, John Nanovic. They worked with Gibson, who went by the trade name Maxwell Grant, which was owned by Street and Smith, to create the characters, traits, tags, tropes, story patterns, obligatory scenes. They handled the copy editing. Gibson just had to write a draft and they would fix any writing problems. But Street and Smith would not risk their profitable franchise on only a single writer, so they had several others write shadow novels. Lester Dent, Bruce Elliott, and Theodore Tinsley also wrote shadow novels that were eventually published. It would, after it became a hit, it would begin with Gibson making a story idea and writing an outline of then a few pages and hand it to his two editors, Nanovic and Ralston. They would make notes and share it with the business manager. The business manager might say, we're underperforming in Philadelphia, having put one of these scenes in Philadelphia. So that's what they would do. They might say, business manager might also say, we paid for this terrific black and white art for the magazine. We'll use it in one of our magazines. See if he can put a scene in Chinatown, and they would do that. Then they would give the notes to Gibson. Gibson would then make a complete outline of the story. That's what professionals did in 1933, and that's what, or 31, and that's what they do now. So then Gibson would write the story in 2 weeks on a manual typewriter. Electric typewriters not yet being invented. Well, The Shadow was a big hit. They might sell as many as 300,000 issues a month. So, Ralston had an idea for another character. And they asked Lester Dent to be the lead writer on that, as just as with Gibson, who was the main writer on The Shadow. They would have some other writers, but Lester Dent would write most of them. And again, it would not be under his name, it would be under the company name, Kenneth Rosen, or a name the company owned. So in 1933, March 1933, the first Doc Savage came out. And it too was a big, big hit. So for a while, Street and Smith were just delighted with their Pulp Fiction heroes. They were making them a lot of money. So these are some I read. This one, Brand of the Werewolf, was the book my grandmother gave me on May 23rd, 1966, that basically changed my life, because until then, I thought I was going to be a comic book writer. I was writing and illustrating my own comic books and my own characters. And after that, I wanted to write text, print novels. Way leads on to way. And then when I started college, I actually would go to the Town Crier bookstore. That's where I bought this. Now, this was years later. This had been out, Polar Treasure. But I read that in attending college, and I thought, well, this is great. But I was busy. I couldn't work on it. I'd do schoolwork. And but this came out while I was in college, and I also read it, Philip Jose Farmer's book about Doc Savage. It's got a family tree, Doc Savage, his apocalyptic life, as the Archangel of Technopolis, and Exotica as the golden-eyed hero of 181 super-sagas. The Bronze Knight of the Running Board, including his final battle against the forces of hell itself. Doubleday Company, 1973. Now, I was in high school in 73, but I saw a paperback copy in 75, and that's I had thought then that it had just come out. Dedicated to Lester Dent, Revelator from Missouri, and his wife Norma Gurley. Yeah. Quote from Prometheus Unbound. Quote from Paradise Regained. And a quote from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Now, I hadn't read Omar Khayyam then. I have since. Up from Earth's center, through the seventh gate, I rose, and on the throne of Saturn sate, and many a knot unraveled by the road, but not the master knot of human fate. Well, that impressed me a lot. In 1970, I read The Yellow Cloud. How this was written by the only one back in the 30s written by a woman, Evelyn Coulson. And I'll talk about that in a bit. I'm going to stop here and make sure this is actually recording. Back in the 30s, they hired artists to paint covers. This is the 1930s, as is this. And then in the 60s, when they reprinted all these as Bantam books, they hired James Bama. He did most of the paintings. This is actually a painting of actual people that he adapted slightly from the reality to become these characters. Doc and his 5 assistants. Monk on the right, the short guy. Ham on the left. Johnny, Rennie, and Long Tom. This is not the same book, but it's very similar. My grandmother gave me this book, as I said, May 23rd, 1966. It was 45 cents. Brand of the Werewolf. They were Doc's amazing crew: William Harper Littlejohn, Renwick, Colonel Renwick, the Lieutenant Colonel Monk, Major Thomas, Brigadier General, this was Ham, together with their leader. They would go anywhere, fight anyone, dare everything, seeking excitement and perilous adventure, but only in a good cause. Okay, Evelyn Coulson and the Yellow Cloud. People think that's not a good one. Most of them think this is one of the best ones, and I agree. But people's likes for individual works, movies, books, television episodes, sometimes they're pretty idiosyncratic, as is mine for this one. I read it in April, and I think it was April, but anyway, it was in 1970 in the Wichita airport. We were waiting for my dad, and then it was pretty common. They didn't have the kind of security they had now. So my mother, brother, sister, and I went on a Sunday to pick my dad up at the airport. That was common. He'd often be gone for a week or more on business. And Mom would buy us, candy and comic books or magazines. And in my case, now I wanted Doc Savage. So, not this one, the Bantam paperback, which I can't find. I know I've got several copies. Um, and I sat there and read it, and I just loved it. But I have to tell you what was going on. My dad's plane was overdue, and there was a whole bunch of us in that airport waiting area. We all had loved ones whose plane was overdue. And the technology is not what it is now. Possibly somebody could, there's probably a report about this somewhere, but was flying an old Lockheed Electra, which had lots of problems. They crashed, and Dad was flying on this old Lockheed Electra, and he had actually joked he would be flying back on a flying stagecoach that, on a good flight, would bumble up and down. Now, Dad had taken me out in Oklahoma to a place where I actually rode years, not too many years earlier, on an actual old stagecoach. And boy, it was a bumpy ride. So I understood it, what he was saying. The plane, people were crying. People said the plane must have crashed. Every so often, somebody from either the airline or the airport would come and make an announcement. And none of the announcements were good news. What had happened, the plane was flying to avoid serious bad weather, and they'd lost their radio. So they kept flying. They flew a much longer route. And they landed without a whole lot of fuel, but they did make it home safely. And while that was taking place, I read this book, and it held my attention. So while my mother and brother and sister and several dozen other people, some of them crying, I had my attention on this. Now, I understand, if I haven't reread it in a long time, and I didn't think it was that bad when I did reread it some years ago, but it's always colored by that experience. I finished reading this, and my dad's plane landed. So I have a sentimental attachment. Evelyn Coulson, she's the only woman to write one of the original Doc Savage novels, possibly still to this day. And she did include some things which were odd, kind of out of character. The monk character, he's supposed to be homely. And she has him have plastic surgery to improve his looks. Monk wouldn't do that, but, you know, Coulson also wrote, romance, silly stuff. So, um, and I read this book. I really like Farmer's Virgin. I know there's others, but I have also been a writer, uh, being the first one. I wrote the first of the BTK books. When I was writing it, the people at large, all of them said, "Well, you know he's dead, don't you? He has to be dead. These killers, no, serial killers, don't stop." Yeah. I also knew there were an awful lot of Wichita police officers and lawyers who told me BTK's walking the streets of Wichita. He's still sending letters. The authorities are not revealing that information. And that was true. That's why in many things you'll see references to not having heard from BTK, not from 1980, but from 1988 and later. So anyway, the the quote in this book from the Rubaiyat, that's from the final of the original Doc Savage novels, Up from Earth's Center. See if I can find that. Here we are. Up from Earth's Center. By the seventh gate, I rose, and on the throne of Saturn sate, and many a knot unraveled by the road, but not the master knot of human fate. I really love that quote. Loved it so much, I almost got into a big fight, but publisher relented. In this nonfiction book by me, Robert Beatty, New York Times best-selling author of Nightmare in Wichita. Oh, yeah. For Bruce Cowdery and Katie McCord. That's my 9th and 10th grade English teachers. They weren't true crime fans, they were fans of good English. And what did I put in here? Up from Earth's center, through the seventh gate, I rose, and on the throne of Saturn sate, and many a knot unraveled by the road, but not the master knot of human fate. There are, I have quite a few. I quote, I cite Shakespeare and Tolstoy and several others in that book. The murderer was an English teacher. Bad guy. I have lost count of how many times I have started and stopped recording today. I've had more trouble for this than any other video I've tried. Fortunately, I have seen others on YouTube talk about their difficulties, so there's no substitute just for starting over. That's what I've been doing. Persistence. So this is one of the best, and thing is, Lester Dent wrote that as a novel. It was rejected. This was before he became a Doc Savage writer. After he was hired as a Doc Savage writer, he just adapted this to a Doc Savage story. Uh, this is the Bantam collection of the final Doc Savage original that published up through 1949, Up from Earth Center. This, written in 73, Doc Savage, his apocalyptic life, a summary of Doc and some, fictional he was taken as a teenager, big fan of Doc Savage. I may not have been quite as taken. I was, interested as a writer, not so much as an adventurer. Although, for one I've read, I had more adventures than most of these writers. Had 20 years as an EMT, most of that as a firefighter. So, all right. So I told you about the yellow cloud and my own experience. Uh, People were crying. They thought their loved ones were on a plane that crashed, and then it landed, and they cheered. I had just finished reading this. It seems to me that something else I mentioned, others persistent, and that you should write if not a complete script, at least some notes. And I should have done that because I started this at 9:30 this morning. It's after 7 p.m. And I think I'm forgetting some points I wish to make. I didn't write them down. I think if this had gone as I had thought and I'd have the whole thing recorded in 45 minutes, I wouldn't have to search my memory for them now. So I may make another video. Probably things will occur to me. I'll put these together in a one of the programs like Clipchamp and see if I can upload it to YouTube.